She was sold to a stranger. But one night turned everything around. What happened that night changed both their destinies forever. This isn't just a story about wealth or power. It's about fate and how one moment can rewrite two lives. In this video, you'll discover how a poor girl, betrayed by the world, was pushed into the arms of a man who was supposed to destroy her, yet ended up saving her instead. You'll see how one decision, one act of kindness, and one unforgettable night turned a cruel deal into something no one expected. Love, redemption, and a battle against destiny itself. Stay till the end to see how love conquers even the darkest moments and reveals secrets no one saw coming. Welcome to today's story. The girl who was sold but saved the heart of a CEO. Let's begin. Before we talk about the night that changed everything, we have to go back to where it all began, in a small, forgotten town where dreams were as rare as sunlight. There lived a young girl named Alina, no more than 19, with eyes that carried the weight of the world, yet still managed to shine with hope. Her clothes were worn, her hands rough, but her heart was pure. Every morning, she would rise before dawn, not to chase dreams, but to fight for survival. Her world was simple: a leaking roof, cracked walls, and a sick mother who hadn't smiled in months. Every day was a battle to earn enough for medicine, food, and rent. Alina worked everywhere she could, washing clothes, cleaning houses, serving tea in a roadside stall. People admired her for her strength, but no one knew the tears she swallowed each night. Her father had once owned a small shop, honest, kind, and hardworking. But kindness doesn't pay debts. A fire had burned down everything they had. The loans piled up. The creditors stopped knocking politely and began demanding payment with threats. Her father, unable to bear the shame, fell sick, leaving Alina to hold what was left of the family together. Days turned into weeks, and hope grew thinner. She sold everything: her mother's jewelry, her books, even her favorite shawl, just to buy a few more days apiece. But debt doesn't disappear that easily. It only grows hungrier. One evening, when the sun dipped low and the sound of the city faded, a black car arrived at her doorstep. A man stepped out, polished shoes, sharp suit, and eyes that had never known mercy. His name was Mr. Kasim, a wealthy local businessman, known for lending money to the poor and collecting it in ways no one dared to question. He didn't come to talk, he came to claim. Her family owed him a large amount, far more than they could ever repay. Alina begged for time, cried for mercy, but his heart was made of stone. He looked at her for a moment, not with pity, but calculation. Then he made an offer that froze her blood. "Your father's debt can be cleared," he said, "but you must come with me." It wasn't a question. It was a sentence. Alina's world shattered in silence. Her mother wept. Her father couldn't even lift his head. They were powerless. Poverty had already stripped them of everything. Now it wanted their daughter too. That night, Alina packed a small bag, one old dress, a photo of her family, and a prayer whispered under her breath. She didn't say goodbye properly because words would have broken her. When the car came, she climbed in, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. She told herself she was doing this for her parents, that maybe one day they'd forgive her for it. The city lights blurred outside the window as the car drove her away from everything she knew. She didn't know where she was going, only that she wasn't coming back. The same hours later, the car stopped at a luxurious estate on the city's edge. The gates were tall, the walls cold, the silence heavy. She was led inside, through marble floors and golden chandeliers, the kind of beauty that made her feel invisible. Servants moved quietly, eyes down. She realized she had entered a world where people like her didn't belong. Mr. Kasim didn't say much. He told her she would serve him, entertain guests, and learn how to behave. But deep down, Alina knew what that meant. Fear took root inside her chest, cold and sharp. She felt like she had been sold, not as a worker, but as something less, something owned. That night, in a room too grand for a broken heart, she sat by the window, staring at the city lights far below. She thought about her mother, probably praying for her safety. She thought about her father, too weak to fight. She wanted to hate them, but she couldn't. They were victims of the same cruelty she now faced. Days passed. She was treated like property, spoken to, not spoken with. Every word from Mr. Kasim was a reminder of her helplessness. The mansion became a golden cage. And yet, through the fear, something inside her refused to die. Maybe it was pride, maybe faith. But Alina kept hoping for a miracle. She believed that even in the darkest places, fate sometimes lights a small candle. Then, one evening, fate did exactly that. A high-profile business meeting was arranged in the mansion. Powerful guests, elegant suits, and laughter that echoed with arrogance. Alina was ordered to serve them. Quiet and invisible. She moved carefully, trying not to draw attention. But as she placed a glass on the table, she felt a gaze upon her, different from the rest. It was him, the CEO everyone whispered about, Mr. Rayan Malik, a man whose name alone made the room silent, cold, composed, and intimidating. But his eyes, they didn't look at her with cruelty. There was something else, confusion, curiosity, maybe even concern. For the first time in months, someone saw her not as an object, but as a person. She quickly looked away, heart racing. She didn't know that this small moment, this single glance, was the beginning of everything. Because that night, when the storm outside grew wild and the power flickered, their paths would cross again. Not as strangers, bound by fate, but as two broken souls who didn't yet know they were about to save each other. And as the thunder roared outside, Alina whispered a prayer. She didn't know who she was praying to, but deep down, she felt something shift. Maybe destiny had finally heard her cry. Before we moved to that night, remember this? She didn't choose her pain, but she chose her courage. And sometimes, that's what changes everything. Before we talk about the night that would change everything, we need to step into the world of the man who unknowingly held her fate in his hands. Rayan Malik, the CEO everyone whispered about, but no one dared to truly know. Rayan was a man carved out of discipline and silence. To the world! He was perfection sharp in his suits, precise in his words, and untouchable in his power. He built an empire from nothing, yet behind his success was a loneliness so deep that even the walls of his penthouse echoed with it. People said he didn't smile. They said he didn't forgive. He was the kind of man who made millionaires nervous and boardrooms silent. But no one knew that behind those cold eyes was a wound one carved years ago, hidden beneath layers of control. His story began in a place far from wealth. Born into a modest family, Rayan had learned early that love could vanish faster than fortune. His father, once a dreamer, had lost everything to betrayal and greed. His mother had struggled, teaching him that emotion was a weakness the world would exploit. By the time he was 25, Rayan had promised himself one thing. Never again would he be powerless. He built his empire like a fortress, unbreakable, calculated, cold. Every decision was profit. Every relationship was strategy. His life had no room for chaos, no space for softness. Women admired him, men envied him, and competitors feared him. But none of them truly knew him. They only knew his shadow. His days began with business calls and ended with silence. The city lights were his only companions. He lived in a mansion on the hill, modern, vast, and cold, filled with art he never looked at and rooms he never entered. The staff spoke in whispers. No one ever looked him in the eye. It was on a stormy evening, during one of his rare business visits, that fate began to weave its cruel design. Rayan had been invited to a private gathering by Mr. Kasim, a man known for deals that didn't always follow the law, but always led to profit. Rayan didn't trust him, but business often demanded association with people he didn't respect. Before we talk about the moment he met her, imagine this. A grand hall, glittering with chandeliers, filled with laughter that carried arrogance, the sound of glasses clinking, the scent of perfume, the hum of money and power in every corner. Rayan stood near the balcony, detached from it all, as if the entire room existed behind an invisible glass wall. He didn't come to enjoy. He came to observe. Every person there wanted something from him, an investment, a deal, a connection. He watched them all with quiet precision, the way a hunter watches the forest before the strike. Then she entered the room. He didn't notice her at first. She moved quietly, head bowed, carrying a tray with trembling hands. Her simple dress stood out against the extravagance around her. There was something fragile, yet defiant, about her presence, like a candle trying to survive the wind. When their eyes met, the world didn't stop, but something inside him did. For a moment, he forgot the noise, the deals, the masks. Her eyes, deep, uncertain, filled with quiet fear, caught something buried inside him. It wasn't attraction. It was recognition. A flicker of the same pain he thought he'd buried years ago. But before he could even understand what he felt, she looked away. The connection was broken as quickly as it had formed. Mr. Chasm's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Beautiful, isn't she?" he said with a smirk. "A recent addition to my household. Bought her off a family drowning in debt." Rayon froze. The words hit him like ice. "Bought her." He turned his gaze toward Kasim, masking the disgust behind his calm exterior. "You trade in people now?" he asked coldly. Kasim laughed. You, of all people, should understand. Malik, everything has a price." Rayan said nothing, but his silence was sharper than words. He wanted to leave, to forget this place, but something inside him refused. He kept glancing toward her. She moved like someone trying to disappear. Every motion was careful, rehearsed, afraid. Before we talk about what happened next, it's important to understand that Rayan wasn't a man who believed in emotions anymore. He had spent years shutting them out, locking them behind logic and numbers. But that night, for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar, anger that had nothing to do with business, and a strange pull he couldn't define. When the storm outside grew louder, power flickered for a moment. The lights dimmed, chaos stirred, glasses clinked, voices rose. And in that confusion, Alina stumbled. The tray slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor, spilling wine across the marble. Everyone turned to look. The laughter stopped. Mr. Chasm's face twisted with fury. "You stupid girl," he hissed, raising his hand. Before it could land, another hand stopped him, mid-air. It was Rayon's. The room went silent. His grip was firm, unshaken. "That's enough," he said quietly, not shouting, but with a tone that silenced even the wind. His eyes were cold steel. Kasim blinked, forcing a smile. "It's nothing, Malik. She needs to learn. She's not your lesson," Rayon interrupted. "She's a human being." The tension was thick. Kasim forced a laugh, but the power dynamic had shifted. No one dared speak. Alina stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to process what had just happened. No one had ever defended her. No one had ever stopped the world for her, not even for a second. Rayon released Chasm's hand and stepped back. "I'll take care of the damages," he said flatly, then turned to leave. But before he could go, he glanced back at Alina. Their eyes met again, and in that instant, something wordless passed between them. A promise, maybe, or a warning. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the storm raged outside, fate found a way to bring them face to face again. The lights went out. The mansion, usually loud with music and laughter, fell into uneasy silence. Rayon, waiting for his car, stepped into the hallway, and there she was, trying to find her way with a candle in hand. Before we talk about that meeting, imagine two souls, one bound by pride, the other by fear, standing in the same darkness, guided by a single flame. He didn't speak first. He just looked at her. Really looked. Without the noise, the power, the audience. She seemed even smaller, yet somehow stronger. "You shouldn't let him treat you like that," he said finally, his voice low. She hesitated. "He owns me, sir. I don't have a choice." The words hit him harder than they should have. Owns me! He exhaled, his jaw tightening. No one owns anyone! She almost smiled at that, a sad, fleeting curve of her lips. In your world? Maybe. That reply stayed with him. Simple, soft, but true. He didn't know why he felt angry or why he wanted to argue with her just to hear her voice again. For a man who lived his life in control, this was chaos, and he didn't understand why he couldn't walk away. Before we move to the night that sealed their destiny, remember this moment. A man who had everything, yet felt empty, and a girl who had nothing, but still carried light. In that dark hallway, with thunder shaking the sky, they didn't know they had just stepped into the story that would consume them both. Before we talk about the moment their lives changed forever, we have to go back to that stormy night, the one where fate decided to break its silence. The city was drowning in rain. Lightning cut across the sky like cracks in a mirror, and thunder rolled like a warning from the heavens. Inside the mansion, the power kept flickering, lights dimming, shadows dancing on the marble walls. Most guests had already left, their laughter fading down the driveway. Only a few remained, including Rayan Malik, waiting for his driver to return, and Alina, still clearing the aftermath of the evening. The staff moved nervously, whispering about the weather, about the CEO's presence, about Kazim's foul mood. Everyone was careful. Everyone except fate itself. As the rain poured harder, one of the hallways flooded slightly from a broken window. Alina was sent to close it, clutching a small candle for light. The flame wavered as she stepped into the long corridor that led to the upper rooms, rooms where she was never allowed. But tonight, everything was confusion. At the same time, Rayan had grown impatient, waiting for his car. The driver was delayed due to the storm, so the host insisted he rest in one of the guest rooms upstairs until morning. Reluctantly, Rayan agreed. He wasn't the type to stay anywhere unplanned, but tonight, something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps destiny, kept him from leaving. Before we talk about the moment they met again, imagine the scene. Dark corridors, echoes of thunder, the faint scent of rain mixing with candle smoke. The mansion, so full of noise a few hours ago, now felt like a haunted palace, and somewhere within it, two souls were walking toward each other without knowing it. Alina reached the top of the stairs, unsure which window she was supposed to close. She pushed open a heavy door, the hinges creaking loudly. Inside, the room was vast, dimly lit by a dying fire in the hearth. She thought it was empty until a voice came from the shadows. "Who's there?" She froze. The candle trembled in her hand. I'm sorry," she stammered, stepping back. I was just... The light flickered over his face. It was him, the same man who had stopped Kasim earlier, the same man whose eyes she hadn't forgotten. Rayan recognized her instantly. "You?" he said quietly, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered. "They told me to close the windows. I didn't know anyone was inside." He gestured for her to stay as another clap of thunder shook the room. "You'll get soaked if you go out there now." She hesitated. The rules were clear. She was never to speak to guests, never to stay where she was unordered. But something about his tone wasn't commanding. It was calm. Human. He poured himself a glass of water and sat near the fireplace. "You're not from this world," he said, not as an insult, but an observation. She lowered her eyes. "No, sir! I'm not from any world that people here would care about." There was silence. The kind that stretched, heavy, but not uncomfortable. The rain outside grew louder, filling the spaces between their words. Before we talk about what they said next, it's important to understand Rayan's heart that night. For years, he had lived in control of people, of outcomes, of himself. But tonight, something in her presence loosened that control. Maybe it was the way she looked at the fire, not at him. Maybe it was her calmness, the quiet dignity in her brokenness. "Does he treat you badly?" he asked after a while. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He doesn't treat me like a person." Rayan's jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty before, but hearing it in her voice was different. He wanted to say something to promise her safety, but promises weren't his language. Instead, he asked, "Why do you stay?" She smiled sadly. "Because leaving would cost my parents their lives. Their debt is tied to me. Now, I'm their payment." He looked at her, realizing that the world he ruled was built on people like her. Unseen, unheard, sacrificed for power. It disturbed him in a way he hadn't expected. The fire crackled softly. He noticed her, shivering from the cold. Without thinking, he stood, removed his coat, and placed it around her shoulders. She tried to protest. "Sir, I can't just keep it," he said, his voice gentler than he intended. "It's cold." The warmth of the fabric startled her, almost as much as his kindness. For the first time in years, someone had given without taking. They sat in silence again, the storm raging beyond the window. She watched the flames dance. Lost in thought, he watched her, trying to understand why her presence unsettled him more than any business rival ever had. Before we talk about what happened next, remember that this was not love at first sight. It was something quieter, deeper. The meeting of two souls that had forgotten how to feel, finding warmth in each other's silence. Alina spoke first. "Do you ever get tired, sir?" He frowned slightly. "Tired? Of what?" "Of being strong all the time." The question caught him off guard. No one had ever dared ask him that. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked into the fire. "Strength is the only thing that keeps people like me alive," he said finally. She nodded slowly. "And people like me survive by staying quiet." Their eyes met again. Two truths from two opposite worlds, suddenly equal in their pain. Outside, the storm grew wild. The wind howled, rattling the windows. She flinched as a loud crash echoed from somewhere in the mansion. Without thinking, he stepped closer, as if his presence could shield her. "It's just the storm," he said softly, but he didn't step back. Neither did she. Time seemed to stretch, fragile and uncertain. He could feel the warmth of her breath, the trembling of her fingers clutching the candle. He didn't know why he wanted to protect her. It wasn't desire. It was instinct. Before we talk about the rest of that night, understand this. For Rayon, closeness was weakness. For Alina, closeness was danger. Yet somehow, in that flickering light, both found peace they hadn't felt in years. She sat down again, this time closer to the fire. "You should rest, sir," she murmured. "You've had a long day." He gave a faint smile, the first in years. "You sound like someone who worries too much." "I've seen too much to do otherwise," she replied softly. The firelight painted her face in golden shadow. Rayon found himself wanting to ask her questions about her life, her dreams, her fears, but she answered only what she needed to, and every word made her seem even stronger in his eyes. Hours passed. The rain finally began to fade, leaving behind the quiet rhythm of dripping water and dying thunder. They didn't notice how late it had become. She dozed off briefly, sitting near the fire. Rayon watched her, conflicted. He could have sent her away, called a servant, done what men of his position usually did, but he didn't. He just let her rest. There was something peaceful in watching someone sleep without fear. Something he hadn't felt since childhood. Before we talk about Dawn, remember, this night was not about desire. It was about discovery. Two strangers, bound by pain, had found a brief refuge from the world. When she woke, startled to realize she'd fallen asleep, he simply said, "It's all right. You're safe here." Safe. The words sounded foreign to her, almost unreal. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to see what kind of man he truly was. And for the first time, she saw not a CEO, not a stranger, but a man who looked just as lost as she felt. Outside, the first light of morning crept through the clouds, turning the storm's gray into pale gold. She stood to leave, clutching his coat around her. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "For everything." He nodded, but didn't trust himself to speak. Something inside him told him this wasn't the end, that this night would haunt him, pull him, change him. Before we move to what followed, Remember this moment. A storm outside, a fire dying inside, and two souls who had shared nothing more than silence, yet somehow that silence said everything. That was the night that changed everything. Before we talk about the days that followed that unforgettable night, let's step into the quiet storm that began inside him. The man who once ruled empires with a single word now found himself haunted by a voice so soft it barely whispered. Every moment since that night replayed in his mind her trembling eyes, her quiet strength, her kindness that defied everything he believed about the world. He told himself it was just curiosity, just a passing distraction. But deep down, he knew something had shifted. He tried to bury himself in work. Meetings, deals, boardrooms. Nothing worked. Every file, every phone call reminded him of her words, her fear, her courage. The girl who was supposed to be just another transaction had left an imprint deeper than he cared to admit. His staff began to notice his distraction. His temper flared more easily. His nights grew longer, colder. And the thought that she might be suffering somewhere else, it burned in his chest like guilt he didn't understand. Before we talk about how he found her again, imagine the power he held and how powerless he suddenly felt. He had everything: wealth, connections, control. But none of that could erase the memory of that night. He started sending his people to check on her, quietly, without letting anyone know. A doctor appeared at her door one morning, claiming it was charity. A mysterious payment cleared one of her family's debts. Food arrived at her doorstep, though she never ordered it. She had no idea that the man behind it all was the same stranger who once bought her. But the world around them wasn't quiet. In his world, the world of luxury, greed, and secrets, people talk. Whispers started spreading. A girl from the slums connected to the CEO. Impossible. Unacceptable. His rival smirked. His board questioned his judgment. Even his closest advisor warned him, "Sir, this could destroy your image." But he didn't care. Not anymore. And yet, she did care. She wanted no part in the glittering chaos that surrounded him. When she saw him again, her heart raced with fear, not love. She remembered the pain, the humiliation of being sold, and she couldn't trust anyone, not even the man who had saved her. He tried to speak to her, to explain that he wasn't like the others, but the wall between them only grew taller. Before we talk about how love began to bloom between them, we have to understand the war within her heart. She was torn between gratitude and guilt, between fear and longing, between the memory of what happened that night and the kindness she saw in his eyes. Now, she asked herself over and over, why me? Why would someone like him care about a girl who had nothing? In his mansion, the tension grew thicker. Some servants whispered that the CEO had lost his mind. Others said he had fallen under a spell. Business partners started to distance themselves. Reporters began to sniff around, searching for clues about the mysterious girl who had somehow entered the life of the country's most powerful man. He didn't respond to the gossip. Instead, he made one quiet decision: to keep her safe at all costs. Every move he made now carried her shadow. He rejected deals that felt wrong. He spoke softer, thought deeper. The ruthless man who once crushed competitors began protecting a girl the world saw as worthless, but she couldn't understand his silence. Every gesture of care felt like a reminder of what had happened. She didn't want charity. She wanted dignity. She wanted to stand on her own, to prove she wasn't weak or broken. But her past wouldn't let her go. Old debts resurfaced. The same people who had sold her came back, demanding more. And now, because she had caught the attention of the CEO, they wanted to use her again as leverage, as bait. Before we talk about the moment everything exploded, let's see how the balance of power began to change. He was used to giving orders. She was used to obeying them. But the more he tried to protect her, the more she resisted. One night, she finally told him, "You can't save me by locking me in a golden cage." Those words hit harder than any accusation he'd ever faced in business. It was the first time someone had dared to challenge him, not out of pride, but out of pain. For the first time, he realized that protection was in love, that control was in care, and that sometimes, to hold on to someone, you have to let them be free. That realization marked the beginning of his transformation. The man who once bought power with money now sought redemption through love. And she, the girl who had been sold, began to see the man behind the title. Not the CEO, not the buyer, but the broken soul who had saved her and maybe needed saving too. Before we talk about how their bond deepened, one thing is clear. That night had changed everything. But what followed changed them. He couldn't let her go, and she couldn't stop running. The world around them turned into a battlefield of emotions, jealousy, and fate. And neither of them knew that the real test of love was only just beginning. Before we talk about the moment when everything fell apart, we need to step into the fragile calm that came before it. The world around them had grown tense, filled with whispers, jealousy, and suspicion. But beneath all of that, there was something even more dangerous emotion. He had fallen too deep, too fast, and she had begun to feel the pull of something she didn't want to name. Both of them were walking on a tightrope, stretched between love and destruction. For a while, it seemed like things were getting better. She started working in his company, quietly, away from the spotlight. He gave her space, pretending not to notice her every move, but his eyes always found her. The employees whispered. The board doubted him, but he didn't care. What mattered was that she was safe, close, breathing the same air. But before we talk about the storm that shattered them, we have to meet the snake hiding in the grass. His assistant, a man who had been loyal for years but carried jealousy like poison. He had seen the CEO's weakness, the girl, and he knew how to use it. One night, he slipped forged documents in her office drawer. Documents showing that she had been leaking company secrets. He planted fake messages on her phone, edited and timed perfectly to look real. The next morning, the entire boardroom buzzed with the scandal. When the CEO entered, the room went silent. His eyes found hers. She stood there, shaking, surrounded by accusations she couldn't even understand. Someone said, "Her name?" Someone else slammed the forged files onto the table. The silence that followed was colder than winter. Before we talk about his reaction, imagine the pain inside him. The war between trust and doubts. He wanted to believe her, but the evidence was too strong, too sharp. Every instinct he'd trained as a businessman told him one thing. She'd betrayed you. His voice, once calm and warm around her, turned to ice. "Is this why you came into my life?" he asked, and the question cut deeper than any blade. She tried to explain, but her words broke apart. Her hands trembled as she reached out to him, but he stepped back. The room seemed to close in on her, filled with judgmental stares. The same people who once bowed to him now looked at her as if she were dirt. That day, she didn't cry. She just walked out. Before we talk about what happened next, imagine the silence that followed her absence. His world, once full of noise, meetings, calls, deals, became unbearably still. He told himself he did the right thing, that he couldn't risk everything for a girl he barely knew. But every time he tried to convince himself, her face appeared in his mind. The way she had looked at him when she said, "You think I'd ever hurt you?" Days turned into weeks. He couldn't focus. The truth burned in the back of his mind like an unanswered question. He began digging, searching through every file, every message, and what he found shattered him. The documents were fake. The messages were edited. Someone had set her up, and he had let it happen. Before we talk about the confrontation, imagine his rage when he learned the truth. His assistant, the man he trusted for years, was the one behind it all. When the CEO confronted him, the man confessed everything. How he thought the girl would ruin the company, how he wanted to save his boss from making a mistake. The CEO didn't even respond. He just turned away, silent, eyes burning with guilt and fury. He realized something then. He hadn't just failed her. He had broken her. Before we talk about how he found her again, Let's see what became of her. She had left the city, disappearing into a quiet corner of the world, working small jobs to survive. The newspapers had turned her story into a scandal. People whispered her name with disgust. Yet, she never defended herself, she thought. What's the point? The man she had trusted most believed she was guilty. That was enough punishment. He searched everywhere. He sent private investigators, paid informants, followed rumors. Nothing. Until one day, by pure accident, he found her in a small town, working at a cafe, serving tea with the same quiet grace she once had. He stood at the door for a long time before walking in. When their eyes met, she froze. Time itself seemed to stop. Before we talk about their conversation, feel the silence between them, the kind that only exists between two souls who have both loved and destroyed each other. He wanted to say he was sorry, but words weren't enough. So he did the one thing he had never done before. He let his guard down. He told her everything. The betrayal, the setup, his mistake, his guilt, his sleepless nights. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she asked softly, "And now, do you think saying sorry can undo what's been done?" That question cut through him. For a moment, he almost broke. Then he said, "No, but I can spend the rest of my life proving that I'll never hurt you again." Before we talk about what she decided, we need to mention the revelation that changed everything. The secret she had been hiding all along. She wasn't just a girl who had been sold. She had been protecting someone, her younger brother. The reason she took that deal in the first place? She had sacrificed herself to save his life. When he heard that, his world collapsed all over again. All his anger, all his judgment, all his power. They meant nothing now. He realized that she had been stronger than anyone he'd ever met. She had faced pain, betrayal, and humiliation, and still managed to stay kind. The revelation tore through him like fire. The man who once saw her as a helpless victim now saw her for what she truly was, a warrior. Before we talk about how their love would rise again, let's stay in that moment when truth finally destroyed the walls between them. She cried, not because of the pain, but because someone finally saw her, truly saw her. And he, the man who had everything, fell to his knees, asking not for forgiveness, but for a chance to start over. That night, there were no grand gestures, no promises, just two broken souls facing the truth. That love isn't about perfection. It's about fighting through the lies, the fear, and the pain to find what's real. And as the rain fell outside that small cafe, their story took a turn. Neither of them had expected the turn where people
and pride bowed before love. Before we close this story, picture the morning after the storm. Soft light, quiet hearts, and two people finally at peace. He, the man who once hid behind power, now stood bare and honest. She, the girl who once lived in fear, now found strength in love. Together, they faced the world that once tried to tear them apart, and won. The people who doubted them fell silent. The whispers faded, and what remained was something real, a promise built not on wealth or control, but on understanding and forgiveness. In the final scene, he took her hand and said, "From that one night, destiny changed forever. Love had conquered pain, and two broken souls had become whole again."